welcome back to Contemplating Resonance, Season 3, where we explore deep conversations around spirituality, magic, and personal transformation. I'm your host, Matt Stein, and this is the first episode of Season 3. I'm actually getting ready to, this week, edit the last episode of Season 2 and launch that as we're recording, and my hope is to start rolling out these episodes probably around the Equinox, I guess, in the spring. So y'all I always like to make these predictions to see if they actually come true, and then y'all can hold me accountable for my bullshit. So we are shifting gears this season. So I kind of went with a theme for Season 2. We talked really deep about religious trauma and cult tactics and like just all of the things wrapped around that. And I decided that I wanted to go a little bit broader with the podcast. Because it makes it easier to find guests, because not everybody wants to talk about just one topic. And in fact, we're going to go all over the map today. So this is going to be fun. I am joined by an incredible guest, Jess Karels. Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yep. It is like Christmas carols.
Excellent. So I went and listened to the intro of one of your podcasts to make sure that I pronounced all of your words properly, although I cannot do it with a Minnesota accent. We're going to do it with a Minneapolis with a Mississippi accent, and we're going to see what happens. So Jess Karels, also known as the Mystic Geek. Very cool name. I'm also a geek. I'm also mystic, so I guess we're probably going to be friends. Jess is a magical practitioner based in the Twin Cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, but she seems to refer to it, or you prefer she or they?
Either way,
Either way,
she,
okay.
fine, yeah.
Okay, cool. I will probably go back and forth because sometimes I'm thinking very carefully about pronouns and other times I'm just rolling. But anyway, wanted to make sure I got that right. But you refer to this place as Paganistan. Is that correct?
Yep.
Can you explain that?
Oh, so this is actually pre-me by a lot. I think it was like the early 90s is when the St. Paul, Minneapolis area and that community came up with that name. There's actually is a book documenting the growth and evolution of the culture of the community called Paganistan by Dr. Murphy Pizza. And it's actually spelled Pizza. It was printed, I think, back in like the early 2010s.
Oh,
Unfortunately, it's out of print, and it's like the copies that are out of print are like $40 plus. But this is a name that we've been calling ourselves for a very long time. It's because and one of the things that's really unique about us is we're very diverse when it comes to belief systems, and it's this live and let live mentality. I mean, you're going to always have cliques that are like holier than thou than everyone else, but you can have it where the Wiccans, the heathens, the Satanists, the Thelemites will all hang out in a hotel together for a weekend for a convention, and everyone's like, oh, hi, and they'll check each other's stuff out, and there's not really this vying for attention or superiority that you might see in other religious circles. The other thing that Dr. Pisa noticed about our community is this concept of, with Paganistan culture, is something called being polyaffiliative. So multiple affiliations. So
Got it.
you
Got
could
it. Got
have,
it.
so you have, like, for instance, Wicca, which is duotheistic, god and goddess, but they might be a hard polytheistic person, meaning they actually believe in more than two deities. So they might partake in traditions or rituals with another group as a way of them honoring both aspects of their belief system. So Dr. Pease's book, it's a small little book. It's pretty thin, so it's a pretty easy read if you're into academic jargon. But it really sets the nature of the community, and it kind of stands apart and is a little bit unique. It's not as flashy as, for instance, New Orleans or Salem or whatnot, but we're pretty solid here.
I love it. I love it for multiple reasons, not the least of which is that I have been to Minneapolis, St. Paul at least several dozen times. And I don't mean just passing through the airport, but I've also done that a lot. But I was completely blissfully unaware of all of this. And now I'm like, I need to go back and like explore this angle of these cities that I didn't know was there. Like, I'm fascinated.
Yeah, the other thing is when we look at history, so Llewellyn, the big publisher,
Uh-huh.
they're in Woodbury, which is a suburb of the St. Paul, Minneapolis
Oh,
area.
really? Okay. I did not know
Yeah.
that.
And also when we look at history of the modern pagan movement, back in the 1970s, they had the American Council of Witches, which is when elders of various traditions showed up. They actually showed up into the Twin Cities area to come up with, here are the overall, not necessarily doctrines, it's not like a church council like in Christianity, but more, here's our shared beliefs, because that was also at a time when mainstream media was starting to learn a little bit more about paganism, and they were coming up with their own their scare things that they would put out. They're like, no, here's what we believe. Here it is. It's peaceful. God love. It's like we believe in beauty. We believe in nature. Well, here's our thoughts about evil, so on and so forth, just as a way of showing here's the shared belief area. Not everyone bought into that. Not everyone agreed with it, but it was still a way uh, for pagans of various paths to destigmatize ourselves as we are establishing ourselves and coming into our own as an overall community.
Sweet. Sweet. That is awesome. I love it. I love it. This is why I like podcasting, because I get to hear all these things that I didn't even expect to get all that. That's amazing. Love it so much. Yes, listen, audience, as I gush over my own podcast. I'm having a good day. It has been a good day despite the craziness that we were talking about before we started recording. I'll take it. So anyway, thank you for that. And so I kind of completely derailed my introduction because I wanted to hear it, but it's okay. So you describe yourself as a witchy mentor, a skeptical manifester. I can't wait to talk about that. And a garbage fire navigator. You already know this conversation's, I mean, you've already heard how fun this is going to be, right? So we're going to get into some fantastic stuff, and I'm not going to list off all the things because I don't know what we're going to make it to and what we're not. But also, Jess has a pretty fascinating spiritual journey. So I believe you're my first former Jehovah's Witness on the podcast. Last season 2 I had was when all the Mormons showed up on the podcast. And so now we're going a different direction, which my only exposure to the vast majority of, like, I guess, well, I'll say what it is. Like, I grew up Southern Baptist. So my vast majority of it, my experience to things that were not that, was people explaining what was wrong with them, right? So I love these opportunities to like hear like from someone who was actually there, and we're not in a like what am I trying to say? Like a proselytizing conversation, right? Because that's a very different interaction than what we're doing. So that's very, very, very exciting. But then you like went all on like this little world tour thing that I can't wait to hear about as well. So, and what was it you said? Somewhere I read that you had decided to study witchcraft and the occult while you were enrolled at a Catholic university. Was that?
Yeah, well, it was studying witchcraft and the occult while at a Catholic university, while also dabbling in, well, what is Catholicism and what is Catholic mysticism? Because during my freshman year of college, I ended up at a dorm that was across the street from one of those little Catholic bookstores.
Okay.
And they don't just carry books there. They had
Right.
candles, they had bottles of holy water, they had all the saint medals out there, they had the saint cards, and I'm looking at the medals and I'm picking them up and I'm like sensing stuff from them of, okay, there's more to this cosmology than meets the eye. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of different things, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in the
No.
conversation.
It's cool. It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
We will spiral around the conversation, if you will. But yeah, all the same stuff that you find in the witchy shop, like, it's
Very
also
much.
at the Catholic bookstore, right? It's all good. I love that. Like, my touch points that still exist into Christianity are primarily coming through the Catholic mystic tradition. And like, I guess my my main entry point into that space was Richard Rohr, and then like he's got the Center for Action and Contemplation. So like I went through. They have this thing called the Living School. You know that one?
No, I don't.
Yeah, it's like an online course, cohort based course type situation, like you find in a lot of but like you're basically going through this notion of like, all right, what does it mean to do contemplative Christianity? And what is mysticism, what is the dark night of the soul, and what are all these things, and like engaging with that stuff, but also engaging with like activism at the same time. Like how do you take that contemplation and turn it into like right action in the community, and like you get what I'm saying, right? So like I learned so much that completely complements everything that goes on in like my pure witchy practice, right? Like non-Christian stuff, like all the stuff that it all just fits. Like,
Yeah.
so, like I have an altar to Saint Michael right here, and I pray there every morning before I do the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Mix it all. I'm a bit of a chaos. I think I'm a little bit of a chaos person, chaos witch type person. Like that's, as I'm learning more about that, I'm feeling that that's kind of like, yeah, that shoe fits me quite well. So anyway, before we dive into all the fun stuff we've got queued up, let's pull a card. I've been wanting to do this and I never started it. And I finally was like, okay, season 3, we're doing it from episode 1. And I am going to be using the Southern Gothic Oracle. So this is a deck that my friend Stacy Williams Ing designed. She lives in Memphis, and I live just south of Memphis in Olive Branch, Mississippi. But we had to go all the way to Atlanta to meet at a witchy conference called Mystic South. And so the Southern Gothic Oracle was like, yeah, like basically take all the elements that kind of form this Gothic Oracle or Southern Gothic cultural paradigm and mix it with a system of divination. And the original idea was to do a tarot deck, but she's like, I don't want the limitations of a tarot deck. I want to design this, just based on vibes, basically. And it is an absolutely gorgeous deck. So, and I have mixed in with it there. This was the coolest thing ever. Her oracles have expansion packs. So
Whoa.
I have the Southern Gothic Oracle Haunts expansion pack mixed in with the main deck. And it's a little bit confusing because I've got the print guidebook for the main deck, but then I have a PDF of the Haunts expansion pack up on this other monitor here. So we will see what happens. I did a spread with this the other day for the new moon, and I ended up with 2 cards from the expansion pack, and I realized I didn't have the guide handy, and I went to download it and the link was broken. And so I texted Stacy, help, and she gave it to me right away. So that was awesome. So let's see what you want to tell us today, Oracle. Interesting. That's very, so we got the, can't see my screen here. We got the Bride of Annandale, and the keywords here are toxic nostalgia and infatuation. I want to see this is in the, yeah, that's what I thought. This is in the haunts. So I'll pull up the guide page here. Interesting. It's a Mississippi story. Love that. So the story of Helen Johnstone of Mississippi, whose fiance died in a pistol duel, is a tragic example of the lost and lonely survivor. Her ghost is believed to be stuck as an earthbound spirit because she is unable to move on from her heartbreak. People also postulate that she is unable to pass peacefully into the spirit realm because at the end of her life, her family failed to honor her wishes to be buried alongside her true love. Helen was the daughter of the very wealthy Johnstone family who resided in the great Annandale mansion. She was engaged to be married to Henry Gray Vick, the scion of the very powerful family who gave the town of Vicksburg its name. I did not know that. And I've actually spent the weekend in Vicksburg, and I managed to miss that fact. So when Henry died from a gunshot wound, the tragic end to a long-standing quarrel with his former friend James, Helen was, of course, inconsolable. Locals say that her spirit can be seen near her former lover's grave, on the bench or atop the grave itself, eternally grieving, unable to move on. And then it says, the etymology of the word nostalgia is pain for homecoming, or a toxic longing for the past. If you drew this card, perhaps you feel trapped in a spiritual cycle of some sort, and progress seems impossible. Heartbreak and loss are complex feelings, and they change over time. We get stronger as we carry grief, and as we walk forward on our life's path, the grief weighs less and less. Observe how the passage of time allows you to evolve and celebrate the past rather than dwelling on its disappearance. And what's dropping in for me as I read that is the conversation that we had before we ever started recording about how things have gone batshit crazy. And like, I find myself longing for the past, which was equally fucked up. It just wasn't in your face. It was behind the scenes in the back smoky rooms, all the shit, there was still like completely atrocious stuff happening. But again, I used this phrase earlier, blissfully unaware. I had no idea. Like a lot of people have been talking lately about how there's just like this really big like longing for the 80s and the 90s. Why is that? Because you could go a few days and have no fucking clue that crazy shit was going down. And it's like, oh, you got a break. Like, you didn't realize it at the time, but you got a break. Whereas now, like, unless you hide, you're not getting a break from just thing after thing after thing after thing. And so much of it's what's real, what's a distraction, what's both. So yeah, like there is definitely, you feel trapped in a spiritual cycle of feel a little bit trapped in a nasty spiritual cycle right now in the collective, right? Like, I mean, my spiritual cycle is actually doing pretty great at the moment. Couldn't say the same thing even 3 or 4 months ago. I was in a bad spot, but right now doing okay. The collective, not okay, right? So yeah, I feel like that card is very like just absolutely just yelling at the present moment. Cool. Anything you want to throw in there?
No, I think you've nailed it when you were mentioning how it used to be easier in the 90s. I remember back when when our only way to connect the internet was to hog up the family line and all the fun dial tones and stuff. Yeah.
Right. That's right. I forgot because I wanted to call this out. You identify as a Xennial, as do I.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, oh man, like this could turn into a whole podcast episode. Just like I am so passionate about being in this like bridge generation because like I absolutely feel 50% of me is in one generation and 50% of me is in the other, which to the chagrin of both.
Yeah. Exactly. But yeah, it was a simpler time where it's like we had limited access to the internet. Our access
Yeah.
to the news was basically at that point was whatever was on the television at night versus now it's like you have mainstream, you have alt media, you have international media, you have all these different things and everyone's trying to do their breaking news on it. You also had it where your scope of what was considered crisis or was important what important was within your circle of friends and maybe it was going on in the news. But because of our hyper connection, we are bombarded with so much more information about what's going on in the world, especially things that we don't have direct control over. And to the point where studies have shown that this level of engagement causes anxiety because you're seeing everything happening, but you're not able to control it. And now we're stuck with we know there's unfairness and problems in the world, but we can't look away but we need to look away for our own health.
Right.
So it's like it's a lot more complex than it was before. And even then, it was more complex than what the generations before had.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I
They
don't
had like, what was
remember
it,
the
like
numbers.
Walter Cronkite or Evening News. It's like they had like maybe one station, one news channel,
Oh,
one
I
source,
remember having four
newspapers.
channels.
Yeah.
I remember having four channels, and it was like, I remember static. There's no static now.
Yeah, there's no at 11 o'clock they go, they do the anthem and then static for
Right.
5 or
Yeah.
6
There's no
hours.
off the air.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's none of that. And there was a time when things just shut down for the night across the board. Like if you were up, turn on a lamp and read a book, that's what you can do because there's nothing else to do. Watch a VHS cassette, if you had that going on. Because I remember when that didn't exist. I remember our first microwave. I remember so many of those things.
Yeah.
And when they came in the house, it was like, I think my mom was scared of the microwave when my dad brought it home. Like, I seem to recall like her being scared of it. And that just seems so strange thinking about like, you don't even notice the fact that a microwave is in a house. It's just an assumption that there's a microwave nearby at all times. And there's an assumption that if you're eating outside of your own home, probably a significant amount of what you're eating has passed through a microwave at some point, even if you choose not to do that yourself. And it's like,
Yep.
my mom was scared of a microwave. It was a brand new, like, never seen before thing in our home. And honestly, the last thing that I can remember being that significant in terms of a device that came home with you was the iPhone. That was probably when significant amount of everything shifted in a completely irreversible way, I'll say. Because like you said, like we had to dial up to get on the internet.
Yep.
But even then, like the internet didn't have what it has now. You were still subject. You remember the 24-hour news cycle? Like, oh yeah, you get the latest news every 24 hours. That was a big, now it's like every 24 seconds.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like you just keep refreshing whatever window you have. Is like, okay, is there a new thing?
Like you
Or
would go to all your favorite web pages and nothing's changed.
yeah. And you're like, what happened?
And surprisingly, we were okay with it because we didn't know
Yeah.
any better. We didn't expect things to change that quickly. Wow. Anyway, yeah. So this is fun. This is fun to talk about, but I want to talk about all the things. So anyway, if we get to nothing else, I want to hear your story. So the way I have it written here is you grew up Jehovah's Witness, then you explored evangelical Christianity, then you checked out some other things, and then ultimately you found your way to witchcraft. Let's unpack that.
Okay.
Let's unpack that journey.
Wow. So I'm actually going to wind back even before my childhood. So
Cool.
my the story of my mom and dad getting together is actually rather interesting. My mom, family of Hispanic Catholics, didn't know. Some of them, I found out afterwards, some of them were actually could connect with spirits. There was like a family ghost and whatnot. So that's her upbringing. That's what she believed in various things. And then on my dad's side, did not find out until much later in his life that he was into the occult when he was in his late 20s and early 30s, like before he met my
Oh
mom.
wow.
And he had actually gone to a friend for a tarot reading, wanting to find love. The friend described basically that he was going to meet the love of his life in about 6 months, but he was going to have to clean up his act because she's not going to accept him the way that he is. So all the fun things that a single guy in his mid 30s might have in his apartment in the late 70s,
Mm.
he had to clean up that act. And then he met my mom, and it was love on first sight.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah. So there was a little bit of that, all the weirdness going on even in the past on that. So then I come along, and then about 5 years later, during this whole time, we really weren't, family wasn't religious. Like there's Santa, Tooth Fairy, all that fun jazz. And then the witnesses did their door to door talk with my mom. And because of some stuff from her past, she like hungered spiritually, and they gave her the answers that other religions could not provide a suitable answer for. So it's her story. I'm going to leave it at that, but just say that because they gave her what she needed, that's how she got into the witnesses. And my dad went along for the ride during the whole thing. I actually remember being in the Kingdom Hall and watching like him just like be zoned out and just drawing diagonals on the spine, on like the edges of book pages. So you know how like
Yeah.
you know how
Yeah.
in a book they go and they have like this part, I don't even know what it's called, where you have like the edge of the paper on it. He was drawing diagonal lines on those, that part on the Bible. And I'm like, he was zoned out. And I'm like
Amazing.
looking at this going, I have no idea how I should react to any of this.
Right.
Because also, as a 5-year-old, I already had experienced birthdays, Christmases, Easter, whatnot. So it was very earth shaking to be like, okay, we have all these family traditions and we don't have them anymore.
Oh, wow.
And going to kindergarten and all of a sudden no longer being able to participate in my friends' birthdays because it was against my parents' religion. And there was a lot of stuff that I've had to unpack since then on
Uh-huh.
those childhood experiences and the whole concept of being the deliberate outsider because someone else is telling you to versus being an outsider based on your own choice. So,
Right.
yeah, so that was part of my core memories, as it were, that I have since had to work through. So it was really tough going through elementary school where I could not participate in a lot of the activities because it's either you're doing classwork or you're doing things like drawing your hand on a piece of construction paper, cutting it out, and that's the turkey's tail.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
being the only one to not put my hand over my heart during the Pledge of Allegiance, all these different things where I had to be an outcast because that's what my family's religion told me that I needed to be separate from everyone else. And as a kid, that's freaking hard. Like, it's one thing to be bullied, it's another thing to feel like you have to allow yourself to be ostracized because of belief systems. And some people get hardened by it, and it leads to them feeling like that they're justified in staying the outsider and not connecting with other people, which I feel like that's part of what we're seeing nowadays. Fortunately, I went a different route. Part of it was due to some events that happened a few years after my family converted. So, about when I was 8 years old, and my mom was pregnant with our youngest in the family, she wasn't doing too well.
Uh-huh.
And as much as my parents tried to keep it from me, as an 8-year-old, I kind of sensed something was off. But I didn't know that things were really off until I had this lucid dream when I was 8. And I remember sitting in my bed and my room being covered in this very bright light, like brighter than a sunny day. But for some reason, I was still able to see it. And I remember the door of my closet opening and seeing Jesus walk out. And he goes and approaches me in my bed and he's like, your mom and your youngest brother are going to be okay. And think about it as like an 8-year-old where it's like you don't know that something's wrong. And then you hear that, it's like, why are
Oh,
you trying to comfort me? What's going on? And then he's like, and you have to leave the witnesses, they are poison. And then he's like, we'll see each other again. And he just like walks off. And I'm just, as an 8-year-old, when you're part of a religion that's like everything's either angelic or demonic, but at the same time, miracles don't happen in the common world. It's like, what do you do with that?
I don't know.
And
I don't know what I would do with that if that was my mental model now, much less with the mind. I mean, the 8-year-old mind is just becoming conscious for the first time. Like you're just now developing even a sense of self. And oh yeah, by the way, all of this
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, it's like, by the way, this what you're in a situation where you have to get out, but your family's realizing as an 8-year-old, my family was my world. Because think
Of
about as a
course.
child, your world is very, very small and you really don't have as much power in it. But anyway, so fast forwarding on it, my mom gave birth to my youngest sibling. They're both good, but it was still having that nagging feeling of there's more to it than what the witnesses are saying, while at the same time trying to be supportive of, well, I'm part of a family. I don't want to lose my family as well as being an
Right.
outsider with my friends. So it was tough. And I think it was late middle school, definitely before high school, that I had enough. And I remember having an argument with my mom that I refused to go to the Kingdom Hall. And I was actually standing at the top of the stairs and she was at the base of the stairs. We were having we were going at it. And I don't remember the exact words, but I remember the feeling that I had through that conversation of, I don't, because ultimately the argument with the witnesses is you have to follow them to save your soul. If you aren't part of them and Armageddon happens, there is no heaven or hell. You are gone. And as a 13 or 14-year-old, being to the point where I don't care if I completely am obliterated during Armageddon, I am done. I don't believe it anymore. I would rather be myself for whatever time I have left versus think about eternity. Something about that conversation shifted the entire dynamic in the family. Because I remember about within a month or so later was when my mom left the witnesses as well.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow. Amazing.
yeah.
Like we're not even halfway through yet, and you're already like blowing.
Yeah. Being at 13 and saying, because yeah, that's one of the biggest things that some groups of Christianity really push is, are you willing to bet your soul on you being right or wrong? And I'm looking
Right.
at this going, well, if what your path gives me is the shot at an eternal life, but I have to turn against all these things that I believe are true, and I have to be cruel to those who are still of Jesus, like the trans, LGBT, the poor, the meek. I'm looking at this going, I would rather do good in the world in the here and now versus worry about an eternal life. So that was a big mental shift for me in pushing me away from that specific group. I wasn't done with Christianity just yet, but it definitely steered me away and said, well, if they're not the real Christians, what is real Christianity? So in high school, I ended up hanging out with they called them the non-denominational folk, which back in the 90s, non-denominational really meant evangelical, but suburban with the mega church. So that was the group I would hang out with. I'd go do Bible study a couple times a week. I do youth group. I would go to church. Eventually, I would go graduate, as it were, from high school youth group to the church. And I kept looking for something and I never really found it, no matter how hard I threw myself into it, how hard I threw myself into various work. If nothing felt like it fit. And then but I was still trying hungry and searching for, well, what is this truth? What is this connection that was similar to what I experienced when I was 8 years old?
Right.
And that then led me when I went to Marquette University in Milwaukee, which is a Jesuit university, studying for computer science. I was so curious about Christianity and learning from it from a scholarly viewpoint that all my electives were theology. So I ended up with a theology minor.
Oh, wow.
Learning about the history of the church, how different doctrines were
I didn't know you were
created.
serious when you wrote that in the notes that you.
No,
I thought it was like a
I'm
figurative
dead
theology.
serious.
You're dead. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So learning
amazing.
all of those different things while also checking out different churches. So learning about the various movements, learning about the charismatic movement, which is the subset of Christians who actually believe in the supernatural. They're not so firmly into the materialistic. They're not talking about spiritual gifts as metaphors. They see them as spiritual gifts. Those who
Right.
believe in speaking in tongues. There are those who believe that there are legitimate evil spirits that they pray to rebuke or get rid of, or spirits that they can call upon to influence other people. So there's a lot of those different things. And even as I was being exposed to those various groups, nothing felt right. And then I'd hang out with the Catholics and the ritual, and I'm like, okay, the ritual is really cool, but something is missing here too. It's like, yeah, it's like the Goldilocks situation. None of the denominations
Nothing
fit.
is just right.
Nothing is just right. And then it led me to a lot of different bits on soul searching. So going back to when I was a kid, with that experience, all the studies I had done. And then also one thing I forgot to mention was the way my teachers kept me engaged in class and in school when I couldn't participate in the little holiday gatherings was they low key had me write research papers on the origins of those specific holidays. Things that I was in a gifted and talented school. So I think that was my saving grace, was being a gifted and talented school in a relatively um, chill area. Because if someone was to do that now, I could see people blowing up.
Yeah. Right.
So going and looking at this going, okay, everything out there, even if it is seen as divinely inspired, is still a construct of humanity and humankind.
Mm-hmm.
Does it at the end of the day, as long as I'm right with this on the spiritual side of being kind and caring and recognizing my connection with other people, am I wrong in what specific path that I take in order to achieve basically self-enlightenment and connection with others? And when I got to that point in my spiritual journey and my acceptance, I'm like, okay, let's go find books on witchcraft and actually study what this is and make a conscious choice for myself to go that route. So that was how I got to that. Why I brought in my parents on this was as this was all going on, as I was broaching into that step from looking at Christianity to looking at going full on witch was right around the time I was about to get married. And a couple months prior to that was when my dad had a really nasty stroke.
Mm.
I mean, this was like a month or two before my graduation and whatnot. And the reason I bring that up was I remember lighting candles for him, wanting him to be whole again. I
Yeah.
also, that was like some of my early ritual stuff. And then I also remember like he was recovering quickly. And as he was still in the hospital bed, he sat me down and he was very aware of what I was getting into and wanted to impress upon me that I don't want to say the danger, but it's kind of like a healthy acknowledgement that there is a lot more to the power than just simply lighting candles and whatnot. It's
Mm.
like if someone wants to be an electrician, it's the have a healthy respect for electricity. It was that type
Gonna
of
do this,
vibe
you
there.
better take it seriously.
Yeah, if you're gonna do this, you better take this seriously. I mean, he was up and walking and act and like as if nothing had happened to him by the time of that my wedding happened. But it was still that moment of shit hitting the fan gave him that opportunity to finally talk to me and be like, look, you better be darn serious because you're playing with fire.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is a cool story. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a crazy story. It's a wild story. It's a hard story, but like ultimately, like you got to experience a lot of things and learn a lot of things, honestly, very quickly. Like it's like you blitzed through like so many different things and made all those connections and made all those choices before I ever knew that those things were like, I mean, granted, I heard of witchcraft like non pop culture, like real witchcraft for the first time when I was like maybe 11, 12, something like that. But I think I was too scared. Like I went to a church where we did like instead of haunted houses, we did hell houses, where they take you through like, here's the drunk driver. And then, they ended up going to hell and then you go into the hell room. One year I actually worked the hell room. Like I have some interesting stories too. But so I'm like terrified that is because I mean the book that I'm reading is kind of along the same theme of so yeah, like this is wonderful and beautiful and powerful, but if you're going to do this, you need to know that you're tapping into something that you've not tapped into before and it's real and it's you can mess
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
You can play with the wrong thing. You can and so yeah, it's funny. So that was when I started going back down this path. I mean, I don't know when I started on this path, to be honest with you. Like, but when like I guess I had that moment like you had of like, okay, I'm gonna pursue witchcraft and really learn it and get after it. Right? When I made that choice was probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. But one of the first things that I did was I went out and found the book that I first picked up when I was a kid and I read it from cover to cover in like one day. And everything in that book made so much sense. It was like, wow, like I wasn't ready to read the book the first time I read it. The second time I read it, it's like, oh, this was literally written for me in this moment right now. And that book was True Magic, by the way.
Oh,
Do you know that one?
I was trying to remember if True Magic was Amber K or if it was
Amber
a different.
K.
Okay, yep, I have that in my library.
Yeah, yeah. My original copy got destroyed when my parents had a tree go through their roof, and all my stuff was in the attic. Like all my old shit that I forgot was even there, and that was in that box, I'm quite sure. So I had to hunt it down, and I wanted to get the original. I wanted to get the copy I had. I didn't want. There's a second edition that's like I haven't even. I bought it. I haven't looked at it. I read the first copy. Is you can't really see it, but it is right there on my
I was like,
altar.
yeah, I'm looking at this going green book.
Yeah, that's it. That's that. Because it's just like that was like for me. It's just it's a symbol of where it started.
Yeah.
And so I just want to even though like honestly I probably don't do half of the stuff that's in that book at all.
Yeah.
It's still like that's my my first stepping stone into that world. And so it's like, yeah, you're going to go on the altar probably forever.
Yeah. Amber Kay is still around and teaching.
Yeah, I know. I know. Like there's a few folks that like oh, well this there's a class that I'm taking right now and by Heron Michelle. She wrote this book called Elemental Witchcraft that is kind of like it's a nice like synthesis of a bunch of things that I was already interested in, but it's like this is a path. And one of the things that I wanted to do this year was like I want to study an actual path, like as opposed to just cooking it all up like as I go along. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I want to try like following a thing. And she talks about how like so many of the things that she draws from, I was like, I can't quote them in the book. I can't show you because all these people like stuff people are still alive. I have to stuff's still under copyright. Like our foundational stuff is not that old. Which is a big shock to a lot of people, but it's really not.
Yeah, that's one of those things where having it be new actually helped me feel more okay with going into contemporary witchcraft because it's like, well, studying theology and being like, okay, this is about 2,000 years of people interpreting and reinterpreting stuff, and all the like the various conclaves that they had were, or whatever they called the councils, where they would go through and like hash apart and say, okay, this is orthodox and this is heresy, and being
Right.
able to see it. I'm like, I wonder what it would have been like if a different path had happened. Versus here, it's like, oh wow, this is the messy organic side.
Yeah, we're on
And
the
then
front
yeah,
lines of this still. Like,
yeah, exactly. Because it's like you have all the occult movements in like the early 1900s. You have it, I think it's like Margaret Murray was her name, where she came up with the theory that there was this ongoing like group of witches or cult of witchcraft that had been going for who knows how long. She's been debunked by
right.
other historians, but the myth survived enough to create all of these different paths that have the belief that they're tied to something older and deeper than, oh, they were just invented in the 1940s.
Right. 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 Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, as soon as you started talking about it, I was like, yeah, we're kind of like we're helping make this up
Mhm.
as it's being made up. Like it's so young. I mean, I tell my kids this about like computing. Like yeah, I was around before most of the stuff that you think is like just assumed everyday experience. I
Mhm.
lived when none of that stuff existed. Like computing when I was a kid was like not nearly as convenient and exciting. I'm now a director of a bunch of software engineers, and I'm like, so yeah, like I play with old Commodore computers and write assembly language for fun, and yet some of y'all weren't even born when the Commodore was still like a computer that people bought. And y'all have no idea how easy you have it programming today compared to
Yeah.
what we had to work with back then. And again, as an adult, I decided I wanted to like play with that technology because I didn't have the brain to understand the things I do now when it was like actually on the market. I was a kid, still played with it. I played games. I typed in computer programs out of the. It's kind of funny. Like my spell book when I was a kid was like Family Computing Magazine. I'm like typing the programs in that they send, the thing you got every month. It's like you get one thing wrong, you have to start over. Like
Yeah.
it was wild. Did you save your program? Oh no, it's gone. You have to type it in again. Of course, there were people that were younger than me that are like, "What do you mean save? We had to type ours in every time when we turned on the computer. There was no disk." Of course, my kids don't know what a disk is either.
Yeah, people don't know what the origin of the save icon is.
Exactly. It's like, why did you 3D print the save icon? It's like, no, this is actually something from history. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I've got floppy disks in the closet, and I'll like say this, like, what, Dad? Why do you have the save icon? I was like, no, the save icon is a picture of this. What is
Yeah.
that? Yeah, it's really fun. But again, I think this is one of the things that Zennials appreciate, and everybody else thinks we're weird.
We've seen so much change.
Yeah,
So our
yeah.
brains are wired to go, okay, what is change going to look like for the future? What are the possibilities? Because we witness things that we would never have been able to conceive of logically when we were younger coming into being. Like going from the 5.5-inch floppy disk where you could just like snip the side in order to write protect it to
hmm
like the
hmm
little disks to now everything's in the cloud and you
Yeah.
have to remember security codes to make sure no one overwrites stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, I didn't even think about it that way.
Or going from where our ability to communicate with others through telephone was initially attached to the wall with that little coil of a cord.
Uh,
And then now we have cell phones and smartwatches and all of this other stuff where we're interconnected 24/7 unless we choose not to be.
yeah, I think that's the wild thing. Like, even a friend of mine was telling me like how like they started a new job and their boss was like they went on a hike over lunch. They were gone a little while. It's like you were not available on Teams for 2 hours. Like, uh-huh. Like if you walked out of the building when we were kids, you were not available.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried to explain like how when we were running around as teenagers, like yeah, so we had pagers, and then you went to the payphone and you paged somebody, and they would call you back on the pay. Like, what's a payphone? It's like a phone that you drove up,
Right.
or you walked up to. Like, because I remember there was like these payphones that were outside McDonald's, and we would go hang out at the payphones outside McDonald's. Like, what do you mean you had to stand in a specific place to make? Yes, it was a
Show them the
wire.
Matrix. Show them the
Right.
Matrix. They'll be like, what is that?
Yeah. Yeah. What are they getting sucked into?
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. I want to talk about being a skeptical manifester because, a lot of people, and I myself, I'm a skeptic of, like, I love things and I'm a skeptic of those things at the same time, whether it's technology or philosophy or whatever. Like, I don't think you're not loving something because you're holding that thing accountable and querying that thing and trying to understand that thing and justify that thing and so on. And so, yeah, like the big thing of like people talk about, well, how do you balance trusting your intuition and skepticism? Like, how do you do magic when you don't necessarily just believe wholeheartedly in the magic that you're doing? Because it's like, well, if you don't believe in it, it's not going to work. Well, then how can you be a skeptic, right?
Right.
Take it, run with it. What do you have? What
All right.
topic?
So I do believe that our thoughts, our belief, our energy are very powerful, and we do have the ability to change our reality, whether a reality being our physical reality around us or our internal reality. That being said, there's so many different things that are out there that can affect us, that can help us, that can hinder us. Privilege is definitely a thing. Systemic oppression issues, those are also a thing. So it's like, it's like trying to figure out how to reconcile all of those different things. And I came up with the term skeptical manifester for myself after dealing with a lot of it, of those different topics that came up, especially when I started going more into like the witchcraft community and then started going into the spiritual community. more the new agey side that loves to talk about manifestation and the secret and vibes and whatnot, which again, when we look at the world, there's a lot more to it than vibes that will help you or hinder you. Color of our skin, our gender, where we grew up, our various abilities, these are all things that can subtly affect our outcomes, other people's choices. So the way that I look at manifesting is it's a lot like playing in an RPG, like Dungeons and Dragons. It's like we make the effort, the universe rolls the dice to see whether we succeed or fail. Magic or right thinking or whatnot puts a bonus on it.
I knew that's what you were going to say. That's cool. That's cool.
Or it
That's
might even
cool.
give us the chance to run advantage. But
Right.
you still have to make the effort to roll the dice. That's the important part. You still got to do it. You still got to believe in it. Another aspect of gaming, I would go almost into like the Matrix style game theory. I'm not talking about Matrix movie, but when you start looking at more advanced role-playing games, especially with the ones we have now, where you have these various if-then scenarios with characters. If you know all the mechanics, you can more or less judge what the outcome is going to be based on a certain action.
Right.
So intuition is knowing what that decision tree is to get you to that final point and how other actors or players on this might impact things. And you can use magic, ritual, energy, whatever you want to call it, either to influence your own decisions or maybe massage the decisions of other people to get you towards that specific outcome that you're looking for. So intuition or psychic ability, they're different things, but they give you similar data sets, would be like having the strategy guide for the game and knowing, well, if I want this specific outcome, here's the things that I got to do or what I got to hope for to get to that point or to create that specific outcome. At the end of the day, the power is still overall in the system itself. I can change my thoughts, I can change my actions, and I can put my stuff out there in the world, but I do not take full ownership for manifesting that outcome. The universe, through various people and events, is what causes it. I'm just trying to figure out which direction I need to go to get to that specific point.
So what I'm thinking you just told me is that even politics is basically intuition and magic. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, you're understanding how people are positioned, what their incentives are, what, paths they have available to them. And you're kind of like understanding how those things come together to create, well, here are the likely outcomes. And like, you're inserting yourself into that system in the way that you think is going to influence it to go the way you want it to go based on whatever your intention happens to be. Yeah, I think that we both like people like to say that magic is like this thing that's like, I don't know, separate or special from, I'm like, no, magic is just reality. Just how reality works. It's just, it's recognizing that, where, we do chemistry, for example, and we understand that certain things interact in certain ways according to certain rules and certain amounts, and there are certain byproducts. No different in interpersonal interaction, no different in interaction between any actors, I'll call it, regardless of whether it's, quote unquote, living or not living or an idea.
Yeah.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
there was a book that came out right around the pandemic time called The Little Work. It's
Okay.
kind of a cheeky turn on the concept of the great work, which is what like Western occult practitioners try to go for, which is
Right.
connecting yourself with your greater will. But in the reason I bring it up is in that book, they talk about two different definitions of magic, one by Aleister Crowley, and I think the other one was Doreen Virtue. It was like Doreen Virtue or Doreen Valiente, I forgot which one. But the idea there is that they gave two different definitions for magic. Magic is the changing of the universe in accordance of one's will.
Mhm.
So that is external magic. That is the alignment sort of thing of how do I get the outcome that I'm looking for? And then the other one is changing yourself in accordance to your own divine will, or your own path on that. And that's like the internal work, like the great work sort of thing. And that's equally as important, especially when dealing with a physical reality, because of the power of our minds. If our mind does not believe that we are worthy of a specific outcome or thing because, yay, indoctrination, sarcasm there, we're going to self sabotage when we do achieve that thing. There's
Mhm.
another writer out there who created a book called The Big Leap, which talks about an upper limit problem where you see celebrities or political figures who they're in the height of their game. They've achieved so much success, but then they hit a downfall. They make a critical mistake, scandal, what have you. And the way the author put it is the person could not handle having so much positive in their life that they ended up subconsciously sabotaging through
Mhm.
different things. So that's
Right.
where having internal work is important because we can go through and say, well, I want to manifest $1 million. If you're not in a mental, emotional, and spiritual position to handle being in that point of abundance and wealth and knowing what to do with it, you're going to wreck yourself. And that's why we see like statistics of people who are lottery winners or who gain fame quickly, then all of a sudden their life goes into shambles soon after because they could not handle the weight of that success.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that tracks with a lot of things that I've thought over the years, but you're bringing it all together in a very cool way. And so, as we've been talking, I get the feeling that we were starting to tip over into the topic of egregores, which is one of the other things that you suggested that we might talk about. And, I get the feeling that even if we don't know what those are, they are very much things that are acting upon us and that we don't even know are around. So let's talk about explain egregores to me as if I had no idea what they were.
Okay. So the idea of an egregore, I actually learned about them when I was in college studying in Christianity. And let me think on how to describe it on it. Because the book that I had read that talked about it initially was so there was this theologian, Walter Wink, who came up with I call it the power series, like naming the powers, unmasking the powers that be. And what he was talking about is within Christianity, they talk about the metaphysical, but at the same time, they treat it like it's dead. And he really wanted to bring that topic back. So he actually brought up a book, a verse in the Bible, Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And the argument that Wink had is that states, groups of people, had a spiritual emanation that was connected to them. It's not like, for instance, the United States is not just a group of over 300 million people that live in a very specific area on the North American continent. It's that America itself had a spirit or a soul, which is a very animistic belief on there. And I think that egregores actually come from more like chaos magic or Western mysticism.
Mm.
But the idea of an egregore is it's a psychic entity. So it's a non-physical entity that is composed of and also influences a group of people based on shared belief. So not necessarily a 5-year-old description, but like imagine that you and a group of people decide, hey, we are going to build a club. We're going to go through, we're going to make a little sigil. We're going to do something that defines who we're in the in group or we're in the out group. All of you, by this making this identity, have created this autonomous psychic being that is connected to all y'all through that. And everything that you do in the name of that group or in the name of that identity is feeding that spirit. And that spirit is guiding you and trying to keep you all in check with, well, here's the shared identity, stay within this. So it's not just the social pressure, but there is a psychic pressure as well for conforming with that group thought.
Okay. So I think what you just told me is that basically anytime we form a social club, we're creating an egregore. Every time we, basically join a company, we are connecting with a spirit. Like anytime that here's one that really sticks out to me. So like go to a concert and like there are points in time, especially depending on who the artist was. So like last year, my wife and I went to see Taylor Swift in New Orleans. And there were a couple of moments during that show where I'm like, there are like 65,000 people in here and they're behaving as a single entity. Like she moves her hand a certain way, like she'll just pose and people freak out, but like it's like in unison. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like there's all kinds of spiritual shit going on right now in this room, and it feels like, like I don't know that it's like necessarily a long-lived spirit, but for the duration of that event, like there's this spirit that is literally like the spirit of that gathering with that music, with that, share. Hey, we're here to see, Taylor Swift, or we're here to see Smashing Pumpkins or whatever, right? Like those are two concerts I went to the most recently. So,
Well, I can tell you Taylor Swift does have an egregore. Most
yeah.
celebrities do because of
Okay.
the. So I'm not sure if this is more of a modern phenomenon because of our interconnectivity or if it's always been, but there wasn't as much documentation. But I believe that the development of the concept of a parasocial relationship where you're connecting with someone either through music, their blogging or whatnot, where you feel you know them. But in honesty, you don't. You know a very curated image of them. And so does everyone else. So they're all connecting and feeling this connection to this facade. It may be close to genuine, but you really don't have connection with that individual. You have connection with the image. And all that energy is feeding into that image. And everyone believing, I am a fan of this person, feeds the egregore of that person. So celebrities
Okay,
have
I'm
it.
like not gonna be able to stop like going down this rabbit
I,
hole.
I I have a Chapel Roan. I have a Chapel Roan prayer candle in my on my altar because I was like, I need to tap into some inner rebel right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
Yeah, celebrities, video game characters
well,
of
you're
popular
helping me
games.
understand. You just helped me understand why celebrity prayer candles are actually just as legitimate as like, the traditional ones. Like, yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, I didn't have a problem with them, but I was like, I've never put one on my altar. But now I'm like, there's some spirits out there I want to tap into. Like, I mean, and there's some that I definitely don't want to tap into. And that is okay. Yeah. Like, you've just created a new hyperfixation for me. Thank you very much.
The starting point for this was probably about a year or so ago. I was in some deep meditation, like trance work, where it's like where you almost like at the point where you're dreaming.
Yeah.
And I remember in that seeing Loki, but it was Tom Hiddleston in the full outfit. But at the
Okay.
same time, I'm also like, I'm getting this, but I'm getting a second layer of energy that I was sensing. Like, okay, you're not quite who you think you say you are. It's like you're not Loki, you're not Tom Hiddleston, you're the collective energy of all these people who have this fandom here.
Wow. Wow.
And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And this was even before I fully understood what egregores were. I think I got my actual books on them about a year or so ago. I'm like, so this is the actual term for it.
Okay, so
Because,
like
yeah,
if you would recommend would you recommend any of the books that you have?
hold on. Let me go see if I can reach it. Hopefully, this is this long enough? Yeah, it's long enough. Okay. So, Egregores, the occult entities that watch over human entities by Mark Stavish. Let's see here.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I would recommend this. He also goes at the point of calling out the controlling element of that symbiotic relationship, basically the group mind that keeps people within their bubble, and the importance that if you want to break free, here's steps of how to do that.
Hmm.
Because there are some egregores where it is worthwhile to be a part of that collective and feed off that energy. Swifties, I'm all for. since we're going to talk about it. The nice energy, caring, it's like the gracious, being good and present for other people. There are other egregores that people are connected to, whether consciously or unconsciously. And the reason I bring unconsciously is because you do it just by being and taking different actions. We talked about before, nations can have an egregore. And also identity constructs can have an egregore, like whiteness. Whiteness really did not exist until about the 1600s. Prior to that, all the Europeans hated each other and they were like all built on their nationalities. But when they started to like, let's go and colonize, well, they needed to have something that differentiated them from the people that they were colonizing and gave them a chance to form fake unity as an us versus them. So that's where whiteness comes in. So whiteness and upholding that is its own egregore. Not exactly an egregore I want to associate with, but it's like, so I having to actively acknowledge it and resist it. Even if does offer power, it's challenging. So as you're talking, you're probably hearing me going, oh, it's like every concept out there potentially has an egregore attached to it. Yeah, pretty
Well,
much.
like, even like as you were talking about nations, they probably have multiple.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
there are multiple, like, shared spiritual conceptions of what the United States is. And some of those are, benign. Some of those are maybe okay. And some of those are terrible. And yeah, wow.
Even
Yep,
with
you've got me going.
religion. Yep, even with religion, because with deities, even deities where we have a lot of information from past practices or whatnot, we don't have a direct connection to that entity or that source. We end up creating a shell for it through our collective beliefs about them, through our stories, which then they're able to like deal with it, interact with us through that spiritual entity. So it's kind of like an egregore, but it's acting as a mouthpiece or as an avatar, as it were, for deity. And you can have multiple versions of it. I joked around about Loki, and there's other fictional books where they had multiple iterations of Loki on there. Like the good version, that's like the chill version that was off in the Scandinavian area versus like a menace that was messing with the United States type of setting. You can even with Christianity, you have multiple egregores of Jesus, depending on if you believe in Jesus, the caring of the poor, of the downtrodden, versus Jesus, the conqueror, who is here to smite everyone and everything. So going back to some of the stuff that we're dealing with right now, the Jesus wept Jesus versus the empathy is a sin Jesus that we're seeing.
So are you ever actually connecting with Jesus, or are you always connecting with one of Jesus's egregores?
That's a thing. That's a fun thing to talk about in the middle of the night and speculate.
Or insert,
Yeah,
your
and
favorite.
then you start getting into mysticism where they talk about the different layers of reality and what shapes what. It can really get fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, egregores are actually picking up on online discourse mainly because of current events, with witches being like, well, what can we do? What can we do? And even pre-election, people were trying to hex a certain orange person.
Yeah.
Or when post-October 7th, when a lot of the tragedy was happening in Gaza and the West Bank as retaliation, people were also trying to do hexes against another powerful individual there. And I remember having conversations and saying, look, you don't have a direct tag lock on them. You're just going based on their image online and what people's perceptions are. You're hitting their egregore. And that would then lead to people being like, well, why is none of our magic working? And then the more we talk about egregores, they're going, oh, learning how, because you can still go after someone through their egregore. It's not the same type of thing. Basically, it's like the monster under the bed or the fearsome beast. You just got to mock it. The more that we go through and we mock figures who think that they are powerful, and we just do say, I ain't giving you my fear, I ain't giving you my awe or my attention, you are pathetic, and you go as silly as you can with it, that diminishes that energy and that fearsomeness. And it takes time because it starves it out, because as other people start to believe this person is less than what they're presenting themselves as, that egregore is losing its power.
The individual only actually has power through that egregore. Like if the
Yeah.
egregore disappears, nobody cares who the orange person is.
Yeah, and some people are connected more directly to their egregores than others because it gives them that feeling of power. So in that case,
Mm.
yeah, that's why that person goes off on a tizzy when he's ridiculed because he's physically feeling the psychic effects. He may not be aware of it. I doubt he's
Wow.
aware of it, but he's experiencing it.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Yep. Yep. Hyperfixation, folks. Here it is. Love it. Love it. Well, this has been awesome. I am gonna cut us off because I'm actually exhausted. But I would love to keep talking. If I were younger, I would keep talking. So, Jess, thank you so much for sharing your stories and your knowledge. It's been awesome. I know that people are going to want to connect with you and get more of the goodness that you have to share. So, how can they do that?
All right. Easiest way to find me is going to be the Mystic Geek. You need all three bits of those. My website is themysticgeek.com, and my social media across multiple platforms is either the Mystic Geek as one string of characters or underscores between the Mystic and Geek. Because unfortunately, on some platforms like Instagram and YouTube and Pinterest, someone else already grabbed the name. So I had to put the underscores as a way of spacing it. So if you go to the Mystic Geek anywhere and it's not a sarcastic Xennial who is reverently irreverent, then just put some underscores there or just like go on Google and you'll find me that way too. I've
Fantastic.
been careful on that.
Fantastic. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, everybody, be sure to find Jess in all the places. I danced through all of their stuff this afternoon, and there's lots of fun stuff out. You got, what is this? I forget the name of it already. I'm terrible about this. Something Sundays.
Spiritual AF Sundays.
Spiritualist AF Sundays. Like, there's a whole like long list of things to listen to that I didn't know existed until I started kind of trolling through there today. So there's
Yeah,
definitely,
I'm
and you
picking
got a
that
couple of
one.
new
Yeah.
podcasts that you're
Yep.
like getting ready to.
Yeah, you see, my ADHD, I kind of get my hands in a lot of different things. It's like, the rush for
Same.
dopamine. So
Yeah,
rather than
yeah,
do,
totally.
and I was looking at this going, people keep asking me about spiritual business stuff, and I know we don't have time to talk on it, but so I decided let's do one podcast for people who want to go into spiritual business. One that is more of the spiritual AF Sundays is I'm going to treat that more like my talk show
Okay.
where it's kind of like I'm going to be my snarky self and talk about current events and throw some metaphysics in there. Interesting, we talked about egregores because I'm talking about egregores on a political bent on there. I'm actually going to be researching Colombia, the personification of the United States from its early settlement onward for my next episode because I feel like if that might be an entity that we can call upon for help, or we may have to like help her grow a little bit before we can get her to that point. And then also, it's a Xennial, it's an Xennial occultist from Paganistan. That I want to have is more like my witchy education podcast. The reason I went with the name that I did is I see myself more as an occultist, a studier of the technique versus Paganistan being more of like the religious hub. So it's like, I was like, how do we blend spirituality, like the theology and the religion aspect with the technical aspect?
Love it. So I clicked through all of those and I am eagerly awaiting the content on both of those tracks.
Yeah, I tend to overcommit to a lot of different things. So it's like all the projects being moved through over time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
look, no judgment here. Like I also like to do all the things. And then sometimes because I like to do all the things, I end up doing none of the things.
Yep. And if people are ever curious about my RPG writing, if you go on Drive Through RPG and look up my name, you will find my author page on a couple of the different projects that I've worked on in the past. I'm currently
Oh,
working
cool.
on one currently. I have currently double saying that. And I can't give too many details now because NDA, but once the book
Oh.
gets to a specific point, I do plan on promoting it heavily within my community and being like, hey, You want a fantasy setting that helps you feel a little bit more relief in this modern time, and then nudge them towards it. It's a supplement for an existing RPG system. That's the most I feel comfortable with sharing right now. Because
Okay.
again, it's
Okay.
open development, but people are like, what game system is she working on now? Because I've worked for Onyx Path with Scion, which is their demigod game. I've worked with Pip System Primer, which is a family-friendly RPG thing. I've worked on Midnight World, which is a horror-based game that's out there. And now this one is like another big line, and I'm really looking forward to playing, to not only building the setting, but also seeing people play in it.
Okay. This sounds amazing. I have been like I used to do a lot of role playing stuff. I was a big Call of Cthulhu player back in the day, and I played a decent amount of AD&D, and I played a smattering of other things, and then I just stopped. Of course, part of was me going deeper into the evangelical church, and all of a sudden, like I was told that these things were evil, blah blah blah. So I didn't forget that. When I met up with some friends at this progressive church that I hang out with a decent amount, because it's like the least churchy church, but they're really fun, awesome, amazing people, and I love them. And we had a D&D group within there, and we did that for a while, and it just couldn't keep its legs very long, and we kind of fell apart. The schedules didn't work out, and I keep looking for another game because I really want to play, but everybody's like got their online games seems like they should be easier to find than they are, but it seems like a thing that still like most people still like to do it face to face around a table. Is that part of your experience, or I don't know?
There. Wow, this could be its own episode here. I
I'm
feel
sure it
like we're
could.
we're 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 hitting a cultural shift on it. There are some people who do the in-person stuff. There are people who will do it online now. Roll20, I think, is the name of one of the websites that's out there for being able to do on
Right, that's what we
tabletop role
used.
playing. Yeah, but those both still fall into what I would consider like a friend model of who organizes it, who handles it. It's
Yeah.
usually friends. There is a newer model that's been coming out over the last few years of having a professional GM.
Uh-huh.
So much like if you were to go to Gen Con or somewhere else where someone curates the game for you, well, in Gen Con, they do it because you do it a certain number of times and your badge is comped. Here, you would specifically pay them to do the service that your friend would have done,
Got it.
which is run a game and create it and build that immersive experience.
Got it. Got
So
it.
that's one of the ways I think people are now adjusting to folks having a busy schedule and just wanting to play. Because otherwise, you have the person who's forever the GM and they don't get the chance to play. And
Well,
that's not
that's
fun
the other
either.
thing is like groups start to follow. I was like, well, maybe I should be the GM. I was like, but I want to play. I
Yeah.
was always the GM. I mean, like, I want to play.
Yeah.
I've forgotten how to play. And like the first time I got to play again after like always being the one person running the game, I was like, okay, this is both fun and also like I'm using muscles that I haven't used in a while. This is interesting. Like
Yeah.
I like this a lot. And yeah, but like yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, it's a lot to keep the same group of people together enough to keep a game going. So, but it totally makes sense. I mean, we're turning everything else into like, solopreneur businesses. Why can't running? I mean, you've got me thinking like, oh, well, maybe it's like, no, Matt, you don't want to run games for money. You want to play. But at the same time, I'm like, ooh, I'm a serial entrepreneur too. So like, oh, I could do that for money. I could do
Guilty
that
as
for money. I could do
charged.
that for money. Awesome. Cool. Well, that is it for this episode of Contemplating Resonance. If you enjoyed the conversation, the best way to stay connected is Substack. You don't even have to remember it's Substack. It's contemplatingresonance.com. And that's where all of the content lives. The video, the summaries, the transcripts, all that fun stuff is there. But of course, I think a lot of you still find us through Apple and Spotify and the other podcast providers. Obviously, continue to listen to me however you like. But if you're on a platform that allows you to do stars or reviews or any of that fun stuff, please do that, because even if you don't like no attention is worse than anything. Is like if you don't have people starring you and reviewing you, you don't really show up on the list. So I want to be polarizing, folks. Come on, hook me up with some feedback. And I'm also still doing the social media thing for now, meaning the podcast still has an Instagram account, and that's contemplating.resonance. That may or may not survive. I don't know. I'm still making up my mind about it. I'm feeling increasingly dirty that I still use meta properties, but I haven't completely decided to make the jump yet. So who knows? If you're an Instagram person, you might find us there, or you might not. I can tell you that right now, going forward, Blue Sky is probably that's where I'm investing the most at the moment. I'm actually getting the most growth on my account. There's some really good feeds, hashtags, I forget what they're called there, but like Witch Sky is a thing, Tarot Sky is a thing, and those are growing, and I'm starting to get lots of interesting interaction that way. So that's where I'm personally investing on the Falcon's Mage front. But yeah, feel free to reach out through any of the channels. Hit me up at falconsratlabyrinth.com. Hit me up on the Contemplating Resonance website. I check them all, and let me know what you thought of the episode. And until next time, please stay resonant, folks.